of all, your own apartment was destroyed in this blast. Tell us firstly what you saw in terms of the explosion and what happened.
It was just after 6 o'clock in the evening yesterday. We were looking into what had just happened at the port. There had been some sort of small explosion or fire, trying to find out what had happened. And we heard what we thought was a jet or an aircraft of some sort flying overhead that seemed to be flying very low over the buildings. And that is something that's quite common here in Beirut. So I stood up to try and go outside to see what had happened. And at that moment, there was a blinding white flash, and all the doors and windows in the apartment flew off. All the glass smashed across the place and everything was flying around. I threw myself into a corner and tried to take cover there, and started then just a few seconds later with ringing in my ears, stood up and went outside and saw a very similar scene on the street all around me. All the apartments in this area lived just a kilometre away from the port, and all the apartments around here had suffered in a similar way. People coming out of their homes looking very dazed, bloodied, quite a lot of people with bleeding injuries, particularly from that flying glass.
Indeed, and Leila, I know you had to spend quite a time in the evening at the hospital getting stitches. Give us a wider extent, perhaps, of the damage that has been done across the city.
Well, my area is just one of the communities that's been destroyed here. Really, the whole city of Beirut has been very badly affected by this. Many buildings in the popular downtown areas just are not standing anymore. They simply don't exist now. The frontises have been ripped off. And of course, many people injured as a result. People were out yesterday. The city was opened up and people were also out trying to get things because we had been told there would be a renewed lockdown for COVID-19 this weekend with evening curfew. So it was a very busy evening, and at the hospitals, hundreds and hundreds of injured people turning up at hospitals saying they simply couldn't cope. The local hospital here at about 9 p.m. said they'd had 500 people already. They couldn't cope with any more. So they were begging people without serious injuries to wait or to try and deal with it themselves. So those of us who had those tried to do what first aid we could at home, and eventually in the early hours I managed to go to a hospital to get stitches there for the injury that I had. And they told me they'd had 300 people in just 3 hours and they were running low on many different kinds of antibiotics, tetanus shots, many things that they needed to treat people because they had had so many injuries come in.
Indeed. I mean, this blast coming at a time that Lebanon, already in the midst of its worst economic crisis to date, this port that has been largely destroyed, what impact will that have on the longer term in the country?
This will have an enormous impact. This is the main way that Lebanon gets goods into the country. 80% of the country's wheat comes in through this port. And of course, as we heard yesterday, the grain silos at the port also were destroyed. So the grain that was already in land that had been brought in is destroyed. And now they won't be able to get more in. Everything else is also brought in through that port. Many different kinds of food. Lebanon imports almost everything. And for hospitals as well, hospitals were already struggling because of the economic crisis that's going on here. They haven't been able to import the medical supplies and equipment they need for a long time. And now, even if they do have the money to do so, they won't have anywhere to get it through. So there will be lasting, devastating consequences for the loss completely of Beirut's port, its main point of entry for all these goods it desperately needs.
And Leila, of course, questions still remain as to how exactly this blast happened. Officials have said, though, that the cause was ammonium nitrate, which was stocked for years in that port area without security measures. How are people reacting to that news?
People are dazed, shocked, absolutely furious. Initially yesterday, everybody thought this was an attack. As I say, those of us who heard that noise, which does now appear to have been the pressure from that explosion that sounded like the sound barrier being broken by a flying jet, immediately thought it had been an attack, that a missile had hit Beirut. And once it became clear that this does seem to have been the result of government incompetence, remember this is a country where for months people have been protesting against government incompetence and corruption, fury was really unleashed in people, and desperation, people saying, Lebanon is cursed, what can we do? There's no hope for us here if this can happen. The fact that government incompetence could have led to so many deaths, so many injuries, such destruction in the capital, and it looks like it was simply left there for up to 6 years. This level of deeply flammable, deeply explosive material, and there are various rumours flying around at the moment. Nothing's been made clear, but there are rumours going around that the reason this happened happened was because there had been some air holes left in that container, and they were filled up for fear that this ammonium nitrate might be stolen. If that's the case, then people are even more furious that that was put ahead of people's safety. And while the authorities are saying that this was due to be shipped, the fact that it does seem to have been sitting in that container for so long suggests to a lot of people that it was simply forgotten about.
Okay, Leila, we'll leave it at that for now, but thanks so much for joining us, Leila Molada Allen there, our correspondent in Beirut.